What would you do if the child you raised, the one you poured your entire heart into, suddenly told you that a stranger was her real parent? Would you let her walk away, or would you fight to protect the bond you built with your very soul? It began with a certain silence that follows you out of a fertility clinic. It's not just the lack of words. It's heavier, like someone's taken the sound out of the world and left you with nothing but your own heartbeat. That's what filled the car the day Emily and I learned we would likely never conceive naturally. The doctor had been polite, sympathetic even, but his words had landed with surgical precision. Statistically, your chances are very low. You can continue treatments if you wish, but the likelihood of success diminishes significantly. It was meant as information. To us, it was a verdict. Emily sat beside me, turned toward the window as we drove home. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Pale, lips pressed tight, eyes that wouldn't meet mine. Her hands were folded in her lap, and I saw her thumb moving in small circles, the nervous habit she'd had since college exams. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles whitened. I wanted to speak, to tell her it didn't matter, that we'd be okay, but the words wouldn't come. Anything I said would sound like an excuse, and excuses felt like betrayal. We pulled into the driveway, and Emily went straight upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at a glass of water as condensation slid down the sides and pooled onto the table. My reflection wavered in it. A man who was supposed to be a husband, a provider, a father one day. And in that moment, I felt like a failure wearing a suit. That night, I crawled into bed beside her. For hours, we lay there, back to back, the quiet between us so loud it hurt. Then, just as I was drifting into a shallow, restless sleep, she whispered into the darkness. Maybe it's time to love a child who already exists. The words caught me off guard. I turned to her. Her eyes glistened, staring at the ceiling. You mean adoption? I asked. She nodded once. There are children out there right now waiting for someone to look at them the way we've been waiting to look at someone. My throat tightened. I wanted to say yes immediately, but another part of me, the selfish, grieving part, resisted. I'd always pictured a child with my father's broad hands, or Emily's deep-set eyes, a child with some trace of us. Adopting meant giving up on that picture forever. But when I looked at her, the exhaustion carved into her face, the brittle hope still flickering in her eyes, I knew my answer. Okay, I whispered. Let's look into it. The adoption process was grueling in ways I hadn't expected. The paperwork alone stacked higher than my desk lamp. Home studies, background checks, financial records. They wanted to know everything, down to the books on our shelves. Emily dove in head first, filling out forms at the kitchen table late into the night, her hair tied messily on top of her head. I kept the house spotless, mowing the lawn twice in a week, repainting the living room just in case the social worker decided beige walls looked warmer. We attended mandatory classes on trauma and attachment. They told us things that broke our hearts, that some kids flinched at touch, that others hoarded food under their beds, that trust had to be earned in teaspoons, not gallons. We sat through every session, holding hands under the table. The day we met Clara, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the group home's common room, crayons scattered around her. The first thing I noticed was her hair, a riot of brown curls that looked like they refused to obey anyone. The second thing was her eyes. They weren't sad, not exactly, but sharp, like she'd learned to study people before deciding if they were safe. This is Clara, the social worker said cheerfully. Clara gave us a quick glance, then went back to her drawing. Emily crouched beside her. Hi, Clara. That's a beautiful picture. Clara shrugged. It's a dog. Emily smiled softly. I had a dog once. His name was Jasper. What's yours called? Clara paused, then said, He doesn't have a name yet. Something in me softened. I crouched down too. Then maybe you can pick the best one you can think of, I said. For months, she didn't call us mom or dad. We were just David and Emily. She avoided hugs unless asked, kept her belongings neatly folded in one small corner of her room, as though she was afraid she'd have to pack up and leave again. But slowly she thawed. One afternoon, she peeked into my home office, clutching a drawing of a lopsided house with 3 stick figures in front of it. "This is us," she said, shyly holding it out. I taped it to the wall beside my desk and left it there for years. Another night, she had a nightmare. I rushed in to find her sitting upright in bed, eyes wide. I sat beside her until her breathing slowed, then tucked her in again. Just as she drifted off, she mumbled, "Thanks, Dad." The word hit me like a jolt of lightning bolt. Life with Clara was messy and beautiful. She loved to draw. Soon the fridge was plastered with crooked rainbows, smiling suns, and cartoonish animals. She'd burst into my office, holding up a fresh creation. Sometimes she'd crawl onto my lap while I worked, her curls brushing my chin, and ask me questions about numbers on the screen. On weekends, we went to the park. I taught her how to ride a bike. She fell twice, skinning her knees, but clenched her jaw and got back on until she made it all the way down the path without me holding on. The pride in her face that day was brighter than the sun overhead. At night, Emily and I would stand in her doorway, watching her sleep, her small hand curled under her cheek. Emily would slip her fingers into mine and whisper, "We got lucky." And I'd whisper back, "We really did." For the first time in years, I felt whole. Fatherhood wasn't about blood. It was about scraped knees and bedtime stories and whispered promises in the dark. I didn't know then how fragile it all was. How life can hand you something precious, only to start counting down the moments you'll get to keep it. The first sign was so small we almost ignored it. Emily had been bruising more easily. At first, she laughed it off. "Guess I'm clumsier than I thought," she said when I pointed out the bluish mark on her arm. But the bruises kept coming, dark patches on her legs, her hips, even her ribs. She grew tired, too, sinking into the couch after work, her head tilted back against the cushion. "Long day," she'd say, forcing a smile. But her shoulders sagged. I told myself she was just tired. Stress, maybe. We'd been through years of heartbreak before adopting Clara, and now life was busy, full of homework and soccer games and late-night drawing sessions. Anyone would be exhausted. But one morning, as she stirred cream into her coffee, I noticed her hand shaking. The spoon clinked against the mug again and again until she set it down, pretending it hadn't happened. Something cold slid down my spine. I said gently, "Maybe we should see a doctor." She sighed. "It's probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The tests took weeks. Blood work, bone marrow samples, appointments where doctors spoke in acronyms that meant nothing to us. Every time we sat in those sterile waiting rooms, Clara would squeeze Emily's hand, swinging her legs nervously from the chair. She was 13 by then, old enough to sense when something was wrong, but still young enough to believe that parents were invincible. The day the results came back, the doctor's face told me everything before he spoke. "Aplastic anemia," he said, his voice heavy but measured. "It's a bone marrow disorder. Essentially, Emily's body isn't producing healthy blood cells the way it should. There are treatments, but," he hesitated, "this is a progressive condition." I clutched Emily's hand under the table. She didn't move. She just stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. On the drive home, she whispered, "So this is it." "No," I said too quickly. "There are treatments. There are options." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "David, I don't want you to lie to me." That night, after Clara had gone to bed, we lay awake in the dark, whispering fears into the silence. She worried about the pain, about how much time she had. I worried about what came after, about how Clara would survive losing another mother figure when her birth mother had already abandoned her. And in the quiet between our words, I could already feel time shortening, like a rope fraying strand by strand. The illness took her slowly, cruelly. There were good days, when she'd sit at the kitchen table with Clara, painting watercolor flowers while sunlight spilled across the wood. On those days, her laughter filled the house, warm and strong, and for a moment, we could pretend everything was fine. Then there were bad days. Days when she couldn't get out of bed, when the bruises covered her skin like a map of violence her body inflicted on itself. Her hair began to thin, her energy drained. She tried to hide it, plastering on a smile when Clara came into the room, but I saw it. The way her shoulders sagged the second Clara turned away. One night, I walked into our bedroom and found Emily sitting on the edge of the bed, head bowed. She was clutching a handful of hair that had come loose in the shower. "I don't want her to remember me like this," she whispered. I knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "She won't. She'll remember you as the woman who taught her how to paint, who stayed up all night helping with school projects, who kissed her forehead every single night." My throat closed up. "She'll remember her mom." Emily sobbed into my chest. I held her until the tears ran out. Clara tried to be brave. She sat by Emily's bedside, reading her books, her voice trembling on the longer words. She brought glasses of water, fluffed pillows, even tried to cook scrambled eggs once, though she nearly burned the pan. She was terrified, but she never left Emily's side unless forced. One afternoon, I found them together in bed. Emily was pale, her breathing shallow. Clara was curled up against her, clutching her hand. Emily's free hand stroked Clara's curls weakly. "Promise me," Emily whispered when she saw me. "Anything," I said, though my voice cracked. "Take care of her. No matter what happens. Make sure she never feels abandoned again." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I promise." Clara's head shot up. "Mom, don't say that. You're not going anywhere." Emily kissed her forehead. "I'll always be with you, baby. Always." The way she said it chilled me. It wasn't just comfort. It was goodbye, stitched into a child's language. The end came on a gray morning in early autumn. Leaves scattered across the yard like scraps of fire. Emily's breaths had grown shallow, ragged. The hospice nurse told us it was time. I sat on one side of the bed, Clara on the other. Emily's eyes fluttered open. She looked at us both and smiled faintly. "I love you," she whispered. Then her hand went limp in mine. The world stopped. Clara's scream tore through the room. She shook Emily's arm, begging, sobbing. "Mom, please, wake up. Please." I pulled her into my chest as she cried, rocking her like she was a little girl again. My tears soaked her hair. The house was too quiet after that. Every corner carried an echo of her. A mug left on the counter. A cardigan draped over a chair. The faint smell of lavender on the pillow. At night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the empty space beside me, my chest hollow. Clara wandered the halls like a ghost. She stopped drawing. She stopped laughing. Sometimes I'd find her curled up on the couch with Emily's sweater pressed to her face. We were two broken people clinging to each other in a house that felt too big, too empty. But I kept my promise. I had to. I threw myself into being her father, her anchor. I helped with her school projects, drove her to practice, stayed up late watching movies she picked. I told her stories about Emily so she would never forget. And slowly, painfully, Clara began to heal. So did I? Or at least, I thought I had. Life after Emily's death was quieter, emptier, but Clara and I managed to build something resembling stability. By the time she left for college, our bond felt unshakable. She was my daughter, my purpose, the reason I got out of bed in the morning. Then, one phone call shattered everything. It was late afternoon when my phone buzzed. I was cleaning out the garage, dust swirling in the sunlight, when I saw Clara's name flash on the screen. Her voice was trembling. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Can we talk?" My chest tightened. "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong?" Silence. Then, not on the phone. "Can I come home this weekend?" I tried to press, but she only repeated, "Please. I'll explain when I see you." The rest of the week stretched like an open wound. My mind spun through possibilities. Was she sick? In trouble? Failing her classes? By the time Friday came, my nerves were raw. When she walked through the door, she looked different. Older somehow. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name. We sat in the living room. She twisted her hands in her lap, staring at the floor. "Dad?" she whispered. "Someone approached me at school. My stomach dropped. Who? Her lips trembled. A man. He said he's my biological father. I felt the world tilt. The words rang in my ears like a bell that wouldn't stop. My first instinct was denial. This can't be real. But then came a flood of something darker. Fear. Anger. A primal terror that after all these years, someone might try to take her from me. What? My voice cracked. He knew my name. She said quickly, tears brimming. He knew I was adopted. He even knew Mom's name. He said he's been looking for me for years. Her eyes met mine, wide and desperate. Is it true? Did you know he was alive? I felt something inside me crack. Clara. I rubbed my face, trying to steady myself. You have to understand. Your biological parents gave you up. They weren't in a place to raise you. Your mother and I. But he said he wanted to find me, she blurted. He said he never stopped thinking about me. That he regrets everything. Her voice broke. Dad, I need to know who I really am. The words pierced deeper than any knife. Who she really was. Hadn't the last decade of love, sacrifice, and sleepless nights been enough? Hadn't I been her father in every way that mattered? But to her, in that moment, it wasn't enough. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay calm. Sweetheart, you are my daughter. That's who you are. Nothing changes that. But I could see it in her eyes. Doubt. Curiosity. A tiny crack in the foundation we'd built, widening with every beat of her heart. The weeks that followed were agony. Clara grew distant. Phone calls became shorter. Visits home grew less frequent. When she did come, she asked careful, loaded questions about her adoption, her past. Did my real father love me back then? She asked once. The word real cut through me like glass. I wanted to scream, to tell her that love wasn't blood. That love was bandaging scraped knees, staying up late to help with essays, working double shifts to pay for braces and textbooks. That love was watching her sleep on nights when grief racked her little body, whispering promises I swore I'd never break. But instead, I only said, I don't know what he felt, but I know I loved you. From the moment I saw you. She gave me a sad smile. I know, Dad. I just need to figure things out. And there it was. The slow withdrawal. Not angry, not cruel. Just a quiet pulling away, as though she were tethered to me by a rope that was unraveling strand by strand. One night, I found her in the kitchen during a visit home. She was scrolling through her phone, looking at an old photo of Emily holding her as a little girl. Do you think Mom would be upset if I met him? She asked softly. I froze. Every muscle in my body screamed. Yes, she would. She would be heartbroken. She would never forgive you for choosing a stranger over the father who raised you. But my throat was too tight. I only managed, I don't know. She nodded, as though that were answer enough. I withdrew without meaning to. My calls became shorter too. I hesitated before hugging her. My words carried a sharpness I didn't intend. Because deep down, resentment had taken root. She wanted to chase a ghost, a man who abandoned her, who hadn't even been there when she was sick with fever, when bullies mocked her at school, when she cried for her mother at night. And in chasing him, she had forgotten me. At least, that's how it felt. The fracture became complete the day she said, Dad, I think I want to meet him. I stared at her, unable to breathe. Clara, my voice was hoarse. Do you have any idea what you're saying? This man gave you up. He let you disappear into the system. He wasn't there for you. I was. Your mother was. Tears filled her eyes. I just need to know, Dad. Please try to understand. I turned away. My chest burned with a rage I couldn't release, because it wasn't fair to direct it at her. And yet, I couldn't stop it from spilling out. If you do this, I whispered, don't expect me to be waiting with open arms. Her sob echoed in the room. Why are you making me choose? But hadn't she already chosen? That night, alone in my room, I stared at the photo on my nightstand. Emily smiling, Clara nestled in her lap. I promised you. I whispered into the dark. I promised I'd take care of her. But how do I protect her from herself? No answer came. Only silence, heavy and suffocating. And so the love I once gave freely began to rot, replaced by a bitter seed. A seed that, without me realizing, was already growing into something darker. Something like revenge. The day Clara finally met him, she didn't tell me. I only found out weeks later, when she came home for a weekend visit. She seemed quieter, more fragile. There was a heaviness to her, as if the answers she'd chased had turned to ash in her mouth. We were sitting at the kitchen table when she finally blurted it out. "Dad," she said softly, "I saw him." I froze, my fork clattering against the plate. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers the way she did when she was a little girl caught in a lie. "I met him. The man who said he was my father." My throat went dry, and her voice was small. "He wasn't what I expected." She told me the story in fragments, her words brittle. They'd met in a cafe near campus. He was late. When he arrived, he didn't hug her, just gave her a once-over and nodded like he was inspecting merchandise. "He said I looked like his mother," she whispered. But the way he said it, it felt wrong. Like I was supposed to be proof of something, not me. She described how he spent most of the meeting talking about himself. His struggles, his regrets, his money troubles, how unfair life had been to him. "And then," she said, her voice breaking, "he asked me if I could help him out. With rent. Just until he got back on his feet." She looked up at me then, tears streaming. "Dad, he wanted money. That's all. He didn't ask about my childhood. He didn't ask about Mom. He didn't even know my birthday." Her shoulders shook. "He didn't love me. He never did." I crossed the room before I knew I was moving. I wrapped my arms around her as tightly as I had when she was 7 and crying after Emily's funeral. She buried her face in my chest, sobbing, and I whispered into her hair, "You are mine. You always have been. He has no claim on you." But even as I comforted her, something in me hardened. This man, this parasite, had slithered into her life, stolen her trust, and twisted her heart just to line his pockets. He had reduced my daughter's identity to a transaction. It wasn't enough to comfort her. It wasn't enough to remind her who she truly belonged to. No, he needed to pay. And he would. I began quietly. Research first. Always research. It didn't take long to uncover who he really was. Public records painted a bleak picture. Multiple arrests for petty theft. Evictions from half a dozen apartments. Unpaid child support for 2 other children he'd abandoned long before Clara. Bankruptcies. Fraud charges. A trail of debts and broken promises long enough to stretch across the province. But the real jewel came when I dug deeper. He was running a nonprofit, or at least that's what he called it, supposedly to help fathers reconnect with their children. In reality, it was nothing more than a front for donations that went straight into his own pockets. I felt a cold smile creep across my face. He hadn't just hurt Clara. He was exploiting dozens of vulnerable families. And that gave me leverage. I hired a lawyer. A good one. We gathered evidence, tax records, witness testimonies, financial statements. Piece by piece, we built a case. At the same time, I reached out quietly to some journalists I knew from Emily's circles. She'd been a writer, well-connected in the local press. I fed them everything. The fraud, the unpaid child support, the exploitation. When the first article hit, it spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed about the scammer masquerading as a savior for struggling fathers. His face was plastered across the news, labeled as a con artist and deadbeat. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, the lawsuits came. Civil suits from donors. Legal action from the government. His so-called nonprofit crumbled overnight. By the time the dust settled, he was penniless. His reputation was radioactive. No one would hire him. No one would touch him. He was a pariah, drowning in the wreckage of his own lies. Exactly where he belonged. Clara didn't know, at first, that I'd orchestrated it. She only saw the headlines, the collapse, the chaos. One evening, she sat beside me on the porch, staring at the fading sunset. "Dad, did you know?" I sipped my coffee. "Know what?" "That he was like that. That he'd never really cared." I looked at her, at the pain etched in her young face, and I realized the truth. She didn't need to know the details. She didn't need the weight of revenge on her conscience. I had a feeling, I said gently. Men like him, they don't change. She leaned her head against my shoulder. For the first time in months, the silence between us felt easy again. Weeks later, she came to me with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, for doubting you, for making you feel like you weren't enough. I pulled her into my arms. Sweetheart, you don't ever have to apologize for wanting answers. But you need to remember this. Love isn't about blood. It's about showing up. Every day, no matter what. And I'll never stop showing up for you. She nodded, sobbing against my chest. In that moment, the fracture between us mended. Not perfectly. Scars never vanish, but strong enough to hold. Sometimes I still dream of Emily. I imagine her watching from somewhere beyond, smiling faintly, whispering, "You did it. You protected her." The revenge wasn't sweet in the way I'd once imagined. It didn't erase the pain or bring Emily back, but it gave Clara clarity. It freed her from the illusion that blood defines family. And for me, that was enough. The man who tried to steal my daughter's heart is nothing but a cautionary tale now, a ghost wandering the ruins of his own greed. And Clara? She's mine, always mine, loved one. And justice, in its quiet, relentless way, found him. In the end, blood didn't make me a father, love did. The man who tried to steal my daughter's heart was left ruined, while the bond between a father and his girl grew stronger than ever. But tell me, would you have chosen revenge or forgiveness? Drop your reply in the comments, and don't forget to like, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.